Good morning, everybody. Before I start, I was trying to always figure out how much I actually understood. I live in Holland. I'm based out of Amsterdam. Just a bit of background. I joined VMware 3 years ago. Before that, working on a whole host of technologies, right from sticking a data card into a machine about 32 years ago, and finally here with VMware. I work for the management business unit. Before I go, I just want to have a show of hands. How many people are actually users of VMware technology? Okay, I just wanted to. I had an instance once when I was just saying is that I only had 2 people in the audience, and that was kind of not normal. But I just want to introduce you to a very quick session that complements what Karthik is going to talk about. But moreover is that, just taking some of the information that we just heard from Forrester, I went into our database to figure out how we're actually defining the era of IT going forward into the next 2 years. As I mentioned before, it's becoming quite challenging as we look at virtualization. If we look at virtualization, it's been happening for a long time. I remember doing it when I first worked on the mainframe. And now we've moved into x86. And more importantly, is that we're facing new challenges as we go into this hybrid world. So this morning we heard about security and event information, analytics, private and public. I just want to provide a few slides on what we define as the software-defined data center and our principles and architecture that are exposing themselves to many vendors out there. So really looking at the challenges. Today, if I actually talk to customers, moreover, talking to architects, administrators, and more about the infrastructure and operations teams, efficiency and agility stands out the most. The next 3 are about flexibility, and the other one is about outage, not just within one layer, the network or the storage or the application, it's everything. Now, how we take this forward and how we actually talk about this flexibility, it's interesting to ask people. We've just come back from San Francisco, where VMworld took place, and now we're actually counting down 6 weeks into VMworld Europe, is to actually talk about freedom of choice between private, hybrid, and public. So the software-defined data center is an architecture by VMware that looks at virtualization, but taking that software-defined policy and architecture and the analytics that are based around that, around compute, storage, and network to manage your applications. So today we heard about business-critical applications. A long time ago, working with SAP, still there today. When we talk about SAP, when we talk about Ruby on Rails, when we talk about open source, we're talking about different ways of building applications. Today, applications adapt to their infrastructure. So when we're talking about managing any application on any infrastructure, on abstracting yourself from the physical world, it becomes a very, very important technology to understand. So it's not about simplicity. Virtualization expects you to understand those concepts around configuration and analytics. So when we actually look at the 4 areas, I don't know about you, but because I work for the technical engineering team, and we bring our technologies to market to our customers, it's very interesting to understand today how someone actually purchases technology, especially from VMware. So when you're talking to a person, it's all about the value and your differentiation. I know this because I've actually visiting customers that I've sold software in my past in technologies around HP, around IBM, around SAP, and around Oracle. And it's important to know that these technologies still exist today. So when we talk about automation, interesting word, it's actually a loaded term. Automation has been around since the first computer came out. When I first actually had my first job, I remember working for ICL. It was a British technology company, and we were actually seconded to Shell, based in the Netherlands. But automation for VMware is not just about provisioning, it's about automation that's embedded into the infrastructure. It also embeds itself into policies that, I like the term today that I saw when you're talking about the DNA, and you're talking about how those layers function between each other. It's important to understand how we address that automation. So you'll hear me talk about a workload in the context of high governance, compliance, and low governance. And more importantly, is to understand how we actually provision and manage that environment and regulate that environment. So today, we're not actually focusing, and there are customers out there, is that when something happens, it goes to a help desk. What we want to do at VMware is self-heal and self-regulate. So when we optimize our infrastructure, we know how it behaves. We want to actually protect and create that reliability at those levels. The other is about operations. So I remember my third day at a company called Tivoli. If you spell it backwards, it says I love it, IT. And IBM, I joined IBM. We have HP. We have many, many technologies that actually search for information. So alerting, eventing, looking at event information. So when we talk about cloud operations for VMware, we actually talk about the ability to look at all events beyond VMware, physical, storage, network. But more importantly, is this concept of structured data and unstructured data. Does anybody know what the difference is between structured and unstructured is? So let's take log data. We heard about it. So log data from security, from other areas within the system. It's not just about events anymore. It's actually about operational analytics. So when you actually look at VMware, whether it be a virtual machine or a cluster or a virtual data center, we have to understand the state of that machine at all times. And whatever changes in that machine, we need to know why it changed, what made it change, and how do you regulate it and bring it back into state. So cloud operations is about the physical. So when we look at HP or when we look at other third-party technologies, we have to bring that data in, and we need to actually link it not just to the infrastructure and storage and middleware, but when we're looking at cloud and when we're looking at how applications behave in the cloud, they have different abstraction and binding capabilities. So the technology is actually unfolding new ways of communication between the application and the network and the storage layer. So that's why it's very, very critical for us to work with partners like Nutanix to look at new ways of abstracting and managing data appliances, but moreover is coming back to that application. So many times today we talked about the end user, bring your own device. So VMware, like other companies like Citrix, on board technologies around, how many of you have heard about Horizon and VDI? Great, I wasn't expecting that, that's another good boost. More interesting is who actually looks at bring your own device. When we look at stateless and stateful machines, and when we talk about VDI, when we talk about the healthcare or the life of a patient, we need to get that information out there. It needs to be right, it needs to be delivered fast, and it needs to be managed by an infrastructure that's capable of delivering that information in time. So when we talk about Facebook, when we talk about apps, when we talk about Apple, or when we talk about industry applications, we need to make sure that the automation and management of that infrastructure is reliable. You have a trust mechanism, and we actually now help identify where issues can occur within that environment. And lastly is about business. Don't know about you, but how much does it cost? I found out today that the Scottish are more worried about cost than the Dutch. I've lived here for a very long time, but cost conscious, just enough, just in time, and adapt my networking and storage resources to what my application needs at that time. Too many times today, I'm spending to build architectures on right-sizing infrastructure because the luxury of having too much is going away. So many customers are saying today, before you automate, tell me what I'm using. Actually, tell me how ESX is functioning with VMware to my applications. So cloud business management is the third piece of VMware's offering. Now, when we talk about integrated and ready to build, we're now also not expecting people to build and customize. So what we want to do is make sure that the technology and the automation and the templating and the policies are built into that system. For a long time, we've been looking at dashboards, but people have been talking about root cause analysis. I don't know about you, but how do you proactively identify a problem within a complex environment before it happens? Anybody? You want to take a shot? The interesting idea is about analytics. Understanding the behavior, abnormal and normal. Understanding how algorithms will search through this data very quickly and pinpoint an issue. So when I talked about log data, when I talked about event data, when we talk about SIEM, security and information and event management, we're actually talking about collecting time data, data that's relevant to make a decision, because our future at VMware is that we want to actually regulate and place our workloads in the right place. So when we move forward, it's important to understand what virtualization means for VMware. So many of you are familiar with the fact we talked about the quadrant. If we talk about x86 as a quadrant, we're the leaders, however, there are others. So management and automation distinguishes ourselves from some of our other competitors who are virtualizing their workloads. But this diagram is really summarizing the importance of the software-defined data center. Unlocking, actually identifying, unlocking, and managing policies that regulate network and storage, network security, storage and security, the application. Now, millions of moving parts. I said any infrastructure, any application. So when things change, and they change pretty dynamically, it's interesting to understand how much log data comes out of vSphere, how much log data comes out of VMware, and what information you can find when you start to actually go into that information and start to mine it. That's all done automatically now. So management plays a critical part in moving forward to making sure that you have a regulated, self-optimized, and trusted and reliable environment. So for the software-defined data center, when we talk about NSX, when we talk about the ability to look at our APIs. I heard this today. I learned a lot today, more about having networks that have their own DNA. And you'll have multi-network DNA. You'll have networks that physically change the structure of how you actually build your storage and your networks. And what we want to do is make sure that when we put it into a virtual data center, a unit of management for VMware is not a virtual machine anymore. It'll become a unit of network. It'll become a unit that contains everything. So, how many of you have heard of the term co-location? Today, many people are saying, I'll choose that infrastructure, that storage, and that network. So long gone are the days where you become homogeneous, but you become heterogeneous in what you choose. So we need to make sure that we can automate, and in order to do that, we have to provide a seamless integration. So the area around public and private with VMware is that we care about the workload. We care about the resource. So when we move it from private to public, we control, we regulate, and when I talk about, I was nodding when with PCI, and when you look at the compliance that you have to abide by or regulate, it becomes extremely important to look at all the layers in the software-defined data center. So for us, we are striving, and we continue to do that, is to not look at products, but to look at a common architecture across our platform, which is vSphere, which is our management suite, which is our network and storage layers, and our end-user computing layer. The other area is to provide a unified network that's open, that actually applies that DNA and understands layer to L2, L3, L4, SDN, software-defined networking, software-defined storage, software-defined compute. Now I'm hurrying up here because I want Karthik to have his time. But more importantly is how do we deliver on any application to any place and manage change? I don't know about you, but change has followed me for 35 years. It becomes even more interesting when you start to abstract these layers into your workload. So this is the architecture that I'm going to be bringing forward into VMworld. I didn't launch it at San Francisco, but where management is on the agenda into October. So when we talk about storage and availability, I want to look at how companies like Nutanix, what is it that's unique about your technology that allows us to really deliver on that virtual workspace. So when we talk about a phone and a stateless or stateful application, we want to make sure that we manage that and we manage all the layers. So as we go forth, we are known for compute, but we're actually now starting to move that message forward, is that we want to manage the whole data center and automate it. So why this is a good handover, is we're joining today Nutanix to really look at why. I like doing this because I spend a lot of time educating my internal field and the customers. It's about what makes that difference. So the first one is the vision and how you execute on it. It's great to have a vision, but it's also good to be honest about it. So let me tell you from my view, where we are, there's still a significant amount of work to do in networking and in storage. But when we look at the advancements that Nutanix has made, we want to look at understanding how to leverage that model for private and public in a secure and reliable way. Second is market position and growth. For me, I think I'm looking my age now, but how many competitors do we have? We have many. and we have to live with that every day. So I have to live with the fact is what makes us unique and stand out. What it is, it's actually about the big data initiative. I put a sign up the other day, and I just wanted some feedback, is that operational management is a big data problem. There's a lot of data coming in. You need to decide which is relevant and which is not. Looking at big data, storage analytics. Analytics and automation around storage is really, really important because your applications will behave with different bindings to different storage and network architectures. Time to value. When you're talking and going up the higher food chain, it's how much does it cost and what is your value? What is your value? Now, I know it's a simple thing, but I've been training my guys to say, what is your personal value? And what is your organizational value to achieve that optimal architecture around IT? So, time to market. And lastly, and I'm going to hand over to Karthik, is ESX. Really looking at vCenter. These technologies are embedded into, when you purchase vSphere, you get all these technologies. But what I like today is really looking at high availability, distributed resource scheduling for replication. How important is that to an application that's serving a pharmaceutical company or a patient? So importantly is to understand the integration between our companies and many others, but to really understand the importance of really driving that next level of automation and management for the software-defined data center. My colleague Jorg van Dormalen, who is going to be with us later on this afternoon. So come in and hear more about what we're doing at those layers. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Karthik to continue our conversation. Thank you.